Welcome back to the channel. I'm so happy you are here. So today we're going to be going through examples of good and bad for the second Common App essay so you can get some ideas about how to answer this prompt, which is the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? So this is actually the prompt that I answered 5 or 6 years ago for the Common App essay. And if you want to read that or look at it, there's a video on my channel in which I read it out loud. But the idea here is that you want to focus on kind of the how did it affect you part and what did you learn from the experience, and you kind of want to tell the story about what exactly happened, what was the obstacle you encountered, and what was your thought process, what was your reasoning, what was the actions you took. And it doesn't really matter if you weren't so proud about your actions, or the good thing about this essay is that it's totally okay to portray yourself in a negative light in the beginning if you're able to show the journey of growth and what you learned and what was the experience. And like I said before, the whole point of these Common App essays and just these essays where you're writing about your life is to be able to take experiences of your life and be able to take and extract a lesson that's really unique and that only you could take out of that experience. And if you're able to show that, you're able to show a lot of growth and a lot of personality through your essays. And if you kind of think evolutionarily about who we are as humans, we kind of used to sit around fires and talk to each other and tell stories, and whatever was interesting and whatever had like an important lesson in it would be passed on over generations. And we can kind of see this in religion and in spirituality, where the very important things that were passed down were kind of the stories about who we are as humans, what were the lessons that we're learning. And you're kind of doing the same thing to a smaller extent, where you're kind of taking a story out of your life and extracting a lesson out of it. And if you can do that, you can do that effectively, and you can tell a very specific story and kind of add some enthusiasm and engagement, then you're going to be better than 100% of the essays that are being submitted. So I'm just going to walk you through some things. So the first thing you have to focus on is the introduction. And this is a lot of times the most difficult thing, which is how you want to introduce your thing. And so you want to start out with a hook that grabs the reader's attention, and you can start out with a vivid description, interesting anecdote. And I don't really like the thought-provoking questions as much, but usually if you can kind of start out with an anecdote, that's a great way to start out these essays. And you want to introduce the challenge, setback, or failure. And you want to do this as soon as possible in your introduction, where you're kind of introducing what is the context, what is the failure you're facing, and what is the problem. I've seen some essays, first or second drafts, where the problem is all the way in the middle of the essay, where it takes a long time to get to what is exactly the problem. And you want to start out, what is the problem? What is the challenge? And once you go into a problem, you automatically have a story, because the problem kind of initiates, well, how are you going to solve this problem? How are we going to figure out what is the solution to this problem? And kind of already initiates the story. So just start out with the problem, give the context, and maybe add a little bit of vivid description or interesting anecdote. Anecdote means story. And if you can do that, you're going to have a great introduction. So here's a decent example. And I'll be going through and kind of explaining why these examples are good or bad. Example, which is good. I will never forget the day when my grandfather passed away. He was my role model and mentor, and losing him felt like losing a part of myself. It was a devastating blow that tested my resilience and inner strength. So you kind of see that this person already starts out with the problem, with the challenge, with the obstacle, which is that their mental strength or their mental health is being tested by the fact that they lost somebody who's very, very close to them and a family member. And these are kind of obstacles that are very personal, but you don't always have to give like very challenging obstacles. It can be a small obstacle, because the prompt doesn't say that it has to be a really, really big example or obstacle. But obviously, losing somebody is a huge obstacle in somebody's life, and so you can kind of see right off the bat that this is going to be an essay about how they've refound their resilience and inner strength, and how they kind of moved on, um, or just were able to continue with life after this event. Okay, here's a not so good example. I failed a math test once, but I learned from my mistakes and did better the next time. So this is not a bad example because the failure is bad. The failure is completely fine. It's totally okay to talk about an obstacle that's academic, that has like lower stakes. You can totally talk about how you failed a math test. What you don't want to do is go into the solution immediately. You don't want to talk about in the first sentence or in the first paragraph how you found the solution. You kind of want to save that later on in the story. And you kind of want this to be a story. You can kind of see how this is not a story. You can come up with a story out of this sentence, but this in itself is not a very good story because it's just telling you what happened. It's not saying like what was the process of figuring out a solution, what was the emotions this person was facing, why did they fail it, and what did they decide that they have to do later, what were the people who kind of influenced them and how did they move on. So those are all important things that you can include to make it more of a story. So what you want to do in your introduction: be specific, personal, use descriptive language, convey the emotional impact of the challenge, setback, or failure. What you don't want to do is minimize the importance. So you can kind of see that that bad example kind of minimized the importance of that math test that they failed. And you don't want to use a generic or overused example. And if it's totally fine if you do, but you just kind of want to talk about the experience that you used in a very specific experience. So if you're talking about a math test that you're failing, you'll kind of want to give like the unique details about your experience with the math test, why you failed it, what was going on in your life, and what was the decisions that you made to kind of become a better academic student. So you can write about anything. You just want to make sure that you're telling a story that's unique to you about that thing. All right, so after the hook, we have the story, which is the bulk of your essay. And how you want to approach this is you want to provide a detailed account of your experience and how it affected you emotionally, mentally, and or physically. Sorry, my underlining is kind of bad right now. Use specific examples, anecdotes, or experiences to illustrate your points. So you want to focus on the stories, the anecdotes, the experiences that you have, the examples, kind of be as specific as possible to illustrate how, this experience affected you and eventually what you did as a result to figure out the solution to this. So here's the good example, which is about the grandfather's passing. Okay. After my grandfather's death, I felt lost and alone. I struggled to focus on my studies and extracurricular activities, and I became withdrawn and isolated. But one day I stumbled upon a book that changed my life, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. In it, I found a message of hope and resilience that spoke directly to my own struggles. I realized that I had a choice in how I responded to adversity, and that I could find meaning and purpose in even the darkest of ones. Okay, of time, sorry. And so you can kind of see that this essay is doing a great job of establishing what is the challenges, and it's kind of telling the story about well what's going on in this person's life and what changed it. And this is a really important part, which is what exactly happened in your life that helped you grow and change as a result of that experience. And if I was giving feedback to this essay and they wanted to expand this into more of a story, well, what would I focus on? I would focus on, well, can you expand a little bit more about how this is affecting you, the death, how did it affect your studies? How did it affect your extracurricular activities? What exactly happened when you were becoming withdrawn and isolated? If you can expand on that, that adds greater depth to the challenge and explains the context. And if you can talk about exactly what was so striking about, this book that really influenced you, what were the messages that you were finding in it? And and ultimately, how did you change your approach to life? So not just what did you learn from the book, but also how did you change, all these things where you were getting isolated and withdrawn? What did you do in your life to kind of implement this lesson? And and you can kind of see that this example is doing a great job of kind of establishing that story and establishing that narrative arc of this person's life and how they responded to this adversity. Okay, the bad example is I sprained my ankle once and I had to sit out of the basketball practice for a week. It's really frustrating, but I had to use the time to watch game tapes and learn new strategies. So this is still not that bad, There's still a lot that can be done to make this a very good essay. But the problem is that kind of minimizing the challenge. For a week they had to sit out and they sprained the ankle once, and it's kind of not talking about the obstacle in a very important way. It's not explaining how the obstacle really influenced their life, and it doesn't feel like they're giving too much weight to the obstacle. It doesn't feel like it's a really important obstacle, and so kind of maybe focusing on how this affected them emotionally, physically, mentally, and things like that. And if it didn't really affect you emotionally, mentally, physically, then maybe you can choose a different example. But something that you're giving more weight to as the problem, and then maybe giving more weight to how you figured out the solution. This person said they used the time to watch game tapes and learn new strategies. Well, how did you figure out that that was the solution to you? Then what did you learn through that experience of discovering the solution? So those are all important things. So if I had to summarize this, what you want to do, focus on your personal growth and development and use concrete examples to illustrate how the challenge, setback, or failure has influenced your perspective on life or your future goals. And what you don't want to do, focus only on the negative aspects of the challenge, setback, or failure, or use it as an excuse for poor performance or behavior. Never use excuses in your essays. Always, always, always focus on the growth or the, the the solution or the lessons you learned. And it's okay. Everybody faces challenges, setbacks, or failures. You don't always have to be proud of those things. But you do want to kind of show what you learned from your lessons, how you kind of grew, and what was the result of that, and how it changed your perspective on life and your future goals. Okay, let's get into the last part, which is the conclusion. And this is kind of the important part, which is how did you reflect? What did you learn from your experience? You want to describe what you learned from your experience and how it's affected you in your personal growth and development. You want to be kind of honest and introspective, and you want to show your response to the challenge, setback, or failure, and how that's transformed you as a person. So this is a good example again. They learned that life is precious and fragile, and that every moment counts. I realized that I wanted to use my talents and passions to make a positive impact on the world, and I had the resilience and determination to overcome any obstacle that stood in my way. Today, I am more grateful, compassionate, and driven than ever before, and I'm ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. So automatically, if I was an admission committee, I feel like I kind of know quite a bit about this person. I know that they're pretty introspective, that they learned a lot from the obstacle, and they kind of shared a pretty intimate aspect of their life, which is that they learned that life is really precious and fragile, and so it kind of makes them a pretty compelling applicant. And if you want to write a really good essay, you kind of want to be introspective and honest. Okay. The not so good example is, I know it's important to never give up and always try your best. I know I can apply this lesson to college and beyond. So the reason why this is not a good lesson is not because it's not a good lesson. It's always good to kind of find to never give up and always try your best. But you kind of want to be a little bit more nuanced about your lesson. What exactly about your story made you learn this lesson, and what are the conditions? Because it's not always true that you want to never give up. Sometimes you're in a bad situation. You might want to give up some bad habits, um, always try your best. Well, what did you learn that from, and how did you learn that? You kind of want to connect your story a little bit better to the lesson you're learning, and be a little bit more nuanced about your lesson so that the person can say, like, okay, this person grew. But if you ask somebody, well, should you always try your best? Somebody would say, yeah, without having to go through any challenging experience. And so you want to try to give a lesson where it's nuanced and you're sharing something that you learned through some challenge. Okay. So again, what you want to do, you want to reflect on the deeper meaning and significance of challenge, setback, or failure, and explain how it's shaped your values and beliefs. And what you don't want to do is use cliches or generic statements that don't reveal anything unique about you. Okay, I really hope that was helpful. That was kind of a overall breakdown with some examples of what to do and what not to do for the second CommonApp essay prompt. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'm really happy that you're here. Stick around if you want to see more videos, and see you in the next one. Bye, everybody. Thanks.